You know the story they teach you in school about World War I, right? It's all about trenches, tangled alliances, and the assassination of an archduke. But what if the real story, the one that made the war practically inevitable, wasn't written in political treaties, but in financial ledgers? Well, we're going to open those books and uncover a hidden story of debt, default, and sheer desperation.
So let's just jump right in with this one. Kind of provocative question. What if the Great War wasn't just a clash of empires, but a catastrophic business decision? I mean, a terrible, but maybe logical, answer to a financial problem that seemed impossible to solve. Let's dig into that.
So on one side, you've got the causes we all memorized in history class. The spark in Sarajevo, that whole web of alliances, the patriotic fever. But on the other side, that's the story we're talking about today. The financial pressures that were really building the powder keg. It wasn't just about borrowing money. It was the relentless, unstoppable math of compound interest, making those debts balloon, pushing entire empires toward the very real, very terrifying risk of going completely broke.
Okay, part one, empire built on debt. So how in the world did Europe get into such a dangerous financial spot? Well, it all started with a revolutionary and ultimately really dangerous new idea that pretty much defined the 19th century. You could build an entire empire on credit. This was the brand new playbook, and Great Britain basically perfected it. I mean, think about it. Why spend decades saving up tax revenue to build a railway in India or a naval base in the Pacific when you could just borrow the money and build it right now? Growth was leveraged. Power was financed. The whole planet was being remade on a gigantic line of credit. And this is where you can really see the trap. Just look at this imperial cycle. Every major power, from France to the up-and-coming German Empire, they all copied this model. You borrow to expand, but then, as you see in step 3, that very expansion needs even more borrowing just to maintain it. It created this hidden arms race, not of battleships, but of balance sheets. And it was a cycle that, just couldn't last forever. And if any of these empires needed a little glimpse into their own future, a warning sign, they only had to look south to the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire. It was kind of like the ghost at this huge financial feast. By 1875, this was the cold, hard reality in Constantinople. Over 50%, half, of the entire national revenue was being spent just to make the interest payments on their foreign loans. The result? Well, it was inevitable: bankruptcy. So what happens next is fascinating. The European creditors, they didn't just forgive the debt. No, they took control. They literally set up an administration that gave foreign bankers in London and Paris direct power over Turkish tax collection. So the Sultan, he still had his palace and all, but his empire's finances were now being run by his lenders. This was a terrifying new blueprint for what happens when a great power defaults. So this is the crucial point. Every major power was now staring down the same dilemma. They were all trapped in this debt spiral that would either lead to the same humiliating fate as the Ottomans, or they could find another way out. And war offered a terrible but strangely clarifying solution. A victory could mean new colonies, new resources, maybe some reparation payments. It could solve the revenue problem. And just as important, it could justify the absolutely insane levels of borrowing you'd need to win. And so the war began. And almost immediately, the entire global financial system just shattered. And this is where our story pivots, right across the Atlantic, to a quiet little office on Wall Street that was about to become the economic command center for the whole conflict. This quote just nails the new reality perfectly. This wasn't a war of cavalry charges and bugles. This was a war of pure industrial consumption. It was a furnace that devoured steel, shells, food, and, of course, money, on a scale humanity had never seen before. The Allies were desperate for American goods, but they couldn't just show up with a shopping list. They needed a financial pipeline. So, in late 1914, the British government doesn't go to the US government. They go to one man, J.P. Jack Morgan Jr., and the request they make is just staggering. They ask his private bank
JP Morgan & Co., to become the one and only banker and purchasing agent for the entire Allied war effort in the United States, a private company.
And the system Morgan created, it was brilliant. A perfect closed loop. Look at it here. Step 1. Morgan sells Allied war bonds to everyday American investors. Step 2. All that cash gets deposited into a single Morgan bank account. So when Britain needed, say, explosives, they'd call Morgan. He'd then pay an American company like DuPont directly from that account. It was the largest private line of credit in human history, and Morgan's firm was the master valve controlling it all.
And here's the real consequence of all this. The United States was officially neutral, right? But its economy, not even close. American factories were roaring back to life, pulling the whole country out of a recession, all on the back of Allied war orders. Without anyone ever really voting on it, the entire American financial system had placed a massive leveraged bet that the Allies were going to win. An Allied defeat would mean a default so catastrophic it could bring down the entire US economy. By the winter of 1916, that giant bet was starting to look incredibly risky. The well of private American investment money was running dry, and the Allies, they were on the verge of financial collapse. A new lender had to be found, and really, there was only one place with deep enough pockets.
This timeline is so important for understanding what happened next. It's the ticking clock. Winter of 16, the private loans just stop. By early 17, the Allies are basically broke. Now, the public story is all about submarines and secret telegrams, but behind the scenes, a financial clock is striking midnight. And then, right at the moment an Allied default becomes a real, immediate possibility, bam, America declares war in April. So how did this solve the problem? With a three-step financial maneuver that was, frankly, pure genius. First, the U.S. Treasury starts selling Liberty bonds to millions of ordinary Americans. Second, the Treasury uses all that new cash to give official U.S. government loans to the Allies. And what's the very first thing the Allies do with all that new public money? You guessed it. They pay back their old private loans to JP Morgan and the other Wall Street banks. This is the whole magic trick right here. Look at the before picture. All the risk of an Allied default was sitting on the books of private Wall Street banks. And after, that exact same risk was, poof, magically transferred to the American taxpayer. It was, for all intents and purposes, the first great bailout of the 20th century. Now, with the seemingly endless fire hose of American public money, the tide of the war turned. But when the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the numbers on the global ledger had completely redrawn the map of power forever. This table just says it all. The financial center of the world moves from London to New York. The US dollar kicks the British pound out and becomes the world's reserve currency. And the old powers of Europe, even the victors, they go from being the world's bankers to being its biggest debtors, owing absolutely staggering sums to the United States government. This was the New World Order. Germany was saddled with reparation payments that would, of course, fuel the anger for the next war. Britain and France were victorious, but financially broken. And the United States had been transformed from a nation in debt to the unchallenged financial superpower of the world. But the final bill for this war, the last entry on that great ledger, it would take nearly a full century to settle up, closing with a quiet little transaction that almost nobody even noticed. 2015. What on earth could this year possibly have to do with the First World War? That was the year the British government made its final payment to the U.S. Treasury for the loans that funded the Great War. It took 98 years for that last entry to be made. It's just a profound reminder that history's biggest conflicts are fought not only on the battlefield, but on the balance sheets, where the numbers have a very, very long memory.